a war that's become an existential fight for Iran's government, a war of shifting objectives and sometimes confusing rhetoric. It's a war that's exacted a heavy toll on lives and livelihoods, both in the region and abroad. Now, nearly 2,000 people have been killed in Iran in the last 4 weeks. The Iranian Red Crescent shared this video of a child being rescued from the rubble in Tehran. And in the last 24 hours, Israel and the US have also struck at the heart of an Iranian industry. The attacks on steel plants in Isfahan and Kazakhstan could prove to be a major setback to Iran's economy. Iran's foreign minister promised Israel would pay a heavy price. Well, Iran has maintained its retaliatory attacks, sending waves of missiles and drones into Israel, and there's been a number of interceptions over Eilat and other cities. Earlier, one person was killed in Tel Aviv and several others were wounded across the country. And in a major escalation, Yemen's Houthis, well, they've joined the war too. The Iran-aligned group launched a barrage of missiles towards Israel on Saturday, and the Israeli military has confirmed a missile was intercepted. And in Pakistan, foreign ministers from regional powers, well, they're meeting to discuss ways to end the conflict. Envoys from Turkey, Egypt, and even Saudi Arabia, they've been arriving in the capital, Islamabad, and the talks will be chaired by Pakistan's foreign minister and are set to get underway on Sunday. Well, Iran has agreed to allow 20 additional Pakistani flagships through the Strait of Hormuz. We are live in Tehran, Amman and Kuwait City, but let's start with the Iranian capital, Tehran, because that's where our correspondent Mohammed Val is. Now, Mohammed, can you detail exactly what the Israelis and Americans are targeting? We are hearing that there's a water reservoir that's been hit.
That's right. Sarah, we saw what happened yesterday when they targeted steel facilities, steel companies or factories, and also nuclear sites, 3 nuclear sites yesterday. And today there are reports of several strikes in and around the city of Tehran, of course, mostly to the areas of the east and west. Those are areas we know have concentrations of military bases, but we don't have clarity regarding what specifically they hit there. But also residential areas are close to those targets, and local media talking about some of the residential areas being hit during this latest wave of attacks. And that's a constant situation since the beginning of the war. The Israelis and Americans saying they are targeting military facilities and installations, but also local media showing in pictures and reporting about casualties among civilians. In Hafgul city, as you mentioned in Khuzestan, a water storage facility with a capacity of 10,000 cubic meters has been hit, and some destruction happened there. So that's one of the targets that the Iranians decry as a proof that the Americans and the Israelis are waging a war on the Iranian people. Also, attacks reported in Shiraz and Tabriz. And there was a heavy use of drones across the country, particularly in Bandar Abbas, where the army says it has downed a Lucas American-made drone. There are also reports of drones used in around the city of Minab. That's where some scores of schoolgirls were killed on the first day of this war, but no casualties reported. So a variety of goals, of targets, I mean, have been hit during the day, and it's not very much different from what we saw every single day during the last few weeks. But there is an intensification, particularly in the city of Tehran and some other areas not far from it, Karaj, for instance, to the west.
Right, well, we are, Mohammed Val, a month in now into this war. How do the Iranian leaders think they're doing in the face of these attacks? And also, how is it for Iranians themselves? Because we know the civilian death toll has been high, and it has been daily attacks.
Well, as I just said, civilians are bearing the brunt of this war, many of them being killed. There are reports of civilians killed here and there across the country almost every single day, so there is no doubt about that. Regarding the leaders, they have a much more accentuated kind of discourse or kind of narrative about the war, and they try to show every single day that the Americans and the Israelis have been proved wrong when they thought that this is going to be a short excursion. It is not a short excursion. After a month of fighting, Iran has been consistent, according to the leaders here, in the level of retaliation it has been using against the Americans and the Israelis and lots of other targets across the region. And according to them, there is no reduction in the military capacity and the way they are waging this war, which is a proof that Iran, contrary to the conception in America and Israel, is capable of continuing this war. And also the fact that the Houthis have joined, and the fact that Hezbollah, which was thought to be completely crushed in the Gaza war, has now risen again and is showing fierce resistance. All of these are indications, and also the control on the Strait of Hormuz. All of these are used in the argument here by the Iranian leaders that they are going to fight this war until the end, and there is no way they are going to be defeated.
All right, thank you very much, Mohammed Val there. That's the live for us, rather, from Iran's capital, Tehran. Now, Yemen's Houthis have joined the conflict in the Middle East. The group says it's launched a second attack on Israel in support of Iran.
In response to the enemy's crimes on our people and our countries, and in support of the freedom of the people, we'll continue, with the grace of God, to carry out military operations in the coming days until the enemy stops its hostilities and aggressions.
Well, Israel says it intercepted one missile and sounded air raid sirens in the south. Nida Ibrahim reports from Ramallah in occupied West Bank.
A significant escalation in a region already on high alert.
The Yemeni armed forces, with the help and the grace of God Almighty, has done its first military attacks with a barrage of ballistic missiles against sensitive military targets in the south of occupied Palestine.
And with that attack, Yemen's Houthis entered the war, making this Israel's third active front. The Israeli army says air defenses intercepted one missile before it reached Israeli territory. It comes as domestic tensions are emerging. Israeli military officials are pushing back against the government's strategy in southern Lebanon. More troops have been deployed to expand what it calls a buffer zone, pushing deeper into Lebanon. Media reports suggest the army's chief of staff is concerned by the continued exemption of ultra-Orthodox Israelis from conscription. In Israel, the Houthis' decision to join the battle is seen as a retaliation to strikes on Iranian nuclear facilities and an attempt to strengthen Iran's position in indirect talks with the US to end the war. It's also a message from the Yemeni group, an Iranian ally, to Washington. With exports through the Strait of Hormuz largely blocked, maritime traffic in the Red Sea could be next. The Bab el-Mandeb Strait, an important commercial shipping route, is also used by US carriers to reinforce its military presence in the region. The Houthis have disrupted shipping before, attacking vessels in the Red Sea during Israel's war on Gaza.
It's no secret that any escalation to prolong the war serves Israel's political and military goals. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has been careful not to defy the US president, but he has repeatedly stated that Israel would totally dismantle not just Iran's nuclear facilities, but its ballistic missile program and even its military.
And these Israeli goals do not appear to be aligned with those of the US. A potential end of the war or even a ceasefire is concerning to many in Israel. And that's why Israel is expected to keep trying to jeopardize any diplomatic progress and push for further escalation. Nida Ibrahim, Al Jazeera, Ramallah, Palestine.
The strike by the Houthis could pull Israel's army into a third front as it targets Iran and expands the offensive in southern Lebanon. Yusuf Mauri reports from Yemen's capital, Sana'a.
I think the world expected this from the Ansar Allah Houthis. It was just a matter of time. It was a matter of when. We can expect that the Yemeni group is going to target Israel's economy. They're going to target Israeli infrastructure. They're going to focus most of their military operations on southern Israel, targeting the port of Eilat and targeting the Ben Gurion airport, as we've seen them carry out attacks numerous times. They're also going to, the ace here the main card for the Ansarullah Houthis is the Bab al-Mandab Strait. They want to make Israel pay economically. They want to disrupt their trade routes. They want to disrupt the imports and exports in and out of Israel. They want to destroy Israel's or sabotage Israel's automotive industry, which they succeeded in the Gaza war. No automobiles were able to enter Israel or the port of Eilat for a year straight because of the success of the naval blockade that was imposed on all Israeli ships and all Israeli-linked companies. We can expect more of the same with just more elevated, sophisticated missile attack. Now, the retaliation from Israel on Yemen is expected. And this is the main concern of Yemenis, is the humanitarian situation. Yemenis don't want to face another humanitarian catastrophe that's caused by the likes of these wars where U.S. and Israel are targeting Yemen and tightening the sanctions on Yemen. Yemen is currently under a U.S.-backed economic blockade. Only very limited supply is entering the country. If the U.S. decides to tighten sanctions on Yemen, we could very well be at the precipice of another humanitarian situation.
Israeli police have forcibly dispersed hundreds of anti-war protesters in Tel Aviv's Habima Square. At least 22 people have been arrested. It was one of several rallies that are taking place across the country. Let's now go to Rob McBride, who's following the latest developments in Israel. That's from the Jordanian capital, Amman. Rob, I mean, these protesters being arrested, A, is it a surprise? And B, what is it they're protesting exactly? Because my understanding is there's an overwhelming support in Israel when it comes to the war against Iran.
Yes, there is indeed. It does seem as though while during times of relative peace in Israel, there have been massive demonstrations against the government of Netanyahu and his coalition. When it comes to this conflict, we have seen those protests dwindle, basically people putting to one side their domestic politics. There were some anti-war protests last weekend. They were very small in number. This weekend, the numbers seem to be slightly bigger. They've taken place, as you've seen there, in Tel Aviv and also in Haifa, with hundreds taking to the streets discontented with this war. But generally speaking, the majority of people are still with the government. I think the recent polls have shown that something like 78% of Israeli Jews are still very much backing this war. The feeling is that the government is doing the right thing. Generally, it is taking on Iran. That this has been Netanyahu's ambition, it seems, for decades. But the people are generally with him that this is an opportunity to take on what many people in Israel regard as an existential threat to their very existence. And that while you have a very obliging White House that's prepared to put the full force of the U.S. military to the task, this should indeed be exploited. So people do seem to be putting a lot of the domestic politics to one side. But we remains to be seen that there is a general war fatigue, I think, building in Israel, that after 1 month of fighting all of these promises of regime change and all the promises that Israel was going to finally deal with the ballistic missile threat from Iran, people are questioning as the alarms continue to go off, they continue to run for their shelters or their safe rooms, just what the end strategy is of this government and how this is all going to end for them.
And of course, unlike when the war in Gaza was happening, this time the missiles are making it through. Now, Rob, Israel continues to strike Iran, and we know that in retaliation for those strikes on Iran, Israel has also been dealing with a series of incoming attacks. What can you tell us about those and what's been happening today in Israel?
Yeah, I mean, the attacks have continued. In fact, now that we have a third front to consider, it's worth bearing in mind that earlier on Saturday evening, middle of the evening, the Israeli military said that they intercepted a drone which they suspect came from Yemen. This is the new third front over the port city of Eilat. So they say that that was intercepted. On the other two main fronts that they have been contending with now for a month, one of the most serious strikes from Iran came at Bet Shemesh. This is a town in the center of Israel. This was a missile strike that hit a community that left 11 people injured. But again, as we've seen in the past few weeks, most of the fighting has been taking place in the north, along the border with Lebanon. We've had alerts being issued for Nahariya. This is a northern town close to that border. Also Western Galilee, which is very close to the border, basically on the border itself. Alerts being issued there with the military saying that 6 rockets were fired at Nahariya. One of those was intercepted. The other 5 fell on open ground. But the military has been giving an update on just the amount of fighting that has been coming from Lebanon, that in one day on Saturday, a total of 250 projectiles, they say, were fired by Hezbollah. Now, around 20, that included 23 rockets that crossed over into the border into northern Israel, but it also included an awful lot of munitions, of mortars, rocket fire that was directed at soldiers, Israeli soldiers pushing north, resulting in a number of casualties.
All right, Rob, well, there seems definitely to be a ramping up instead of a ramping down of attacks from all sides. Rob McBride there in Amman. A US Navy ship carrying around 2,500 Marines has arrived in the Middle East. The US Central Command says that's in addition to the Marines. The USS Tripoli is bringing in fighter aircrafts as well as amphibious assault assets. Let's bring in Malik Trainer, who's live for us in Kuwait City. Malik, can you give us a roundup on what you know, perhaps, when it comes to the US assets arriving in the Middle East, but also what's been happening across the Gulf in terms of strikes?
Yeah, well, we're seeing a ramping up and escalation of this war. I mean, we're a month in. You know, people across the region, officials across this region have been calling for de-escalation. Nobody wants this to become a prolonged conflict. You know, we've been hearing from President Trump about, you know, a possible deal. But at the same time, we're seeing all these troops come into the region. I think for a lot of people, that raises concerns. Across, you know, from the beginning, GCC officials have been warning that this can escalate and have wide-reaching repercussions, and we're starting to see that now with the Houthis coming into the conflict. You know, more American assets coming in, and you know. We've seen numerous, no country on Saturday in the GCC was spared from these Iranian attacks. Let's start off in the UAE, where our team on the ground in Dubai just in the last couple of minutes told us that the alarms have sounded and that they can hear what we now know as familiar outgoing bursts and explosions, interceptions. Earlier in the UAE, in Abu Dhabi, 6 people were injured at the Khalifa Economic Zone due to debris from an interception of a ballistic missile. In Saudi Arabia, we've seen the reports of 15 American servicemen injured due to an attack on the Prince Sultan Air Base. Here in Kuwait, the international airport was hit for the 6th time since this war has started. Officials said that their radar was severely damaged. Qatar also said that they intercepted several drones in their airspace. Bahrain, they said that a facility was caught on fire on Saturday, and civil defense teams extinguished that. Numerous alarms in Bahrain. In Oman, the Salalah port was also hit, where 1 person was injured. So we've seen, you know, every country in the GCC essentially hit on Saturday, and this is exactly what officials don't want to see. You know, more than 5,000 ballistic missiles, drones, cruise missiles have targeted the GCC, the entire Gulf, since this war started, and people want an end. You know, we're now seeing a flurry of diplomatic activity. You know, we're talking about Osama bin Javed, our colleague, is in Pakistan, but you know, the foreign ministers of Saudi Arabia, Pakistan, Egypt, and so people are trying to find a diplomatic path to end this war as soon as possible, Sarah.
All right, thanks very much, Malik Trainer there in Kuwait City. Now, as he was mentioning there, Pakistan is expected to host Saudi Arabia, Turkey and Egypt for talks from Sunday. Pakistan's Prime Minister has actively been engaging in high-level back-channel diplomacy in hopes of finding an off-ramp. Shahbaz Sharif says he's been speaking with the US and neighbouring countries in the region to create a conducive environment for talks, he said. He told the Iranians that he hoped collective action could create a viable path to end hostilities. Iranian President Masoud Pezeshkian said he appreciated the efforts, but did add that talks and mediation first required building trust. Osama bin Javed has more from Islamabad.
Four-way talks are essentially a platform that was discussed in Riyadh as soon as there was a meeting between regional and Gulf countries. This is a platform where essentially they're going to be taking decisions, steps to try and, what you heard from the Prime Minister of Pakistan, build trust, as well as try and bring an end to the hostilities. This comes as President Donald Trump, who first announced a 48-hour, then a week-long, and now a 10-day extension in that deadline. So we're expecting these foreign ministers to come together. The foreign minister of Pakistan is essentially trying to find his way to build a regional bloc of sorts where these regional powers, as well as Indonesia, Malaysia, and others, are going to come together. It's worth noting that the Pakistani foreign minister has also, in the last few hours, spoken to the Iranian foreign minister, and we are expecting that Iran has somewhat agreed to sending an emissary of a stature who can hold these negotiations directly or indirectly with the Americans. In the last few hours, we've heard from the foreign minister as well that at least 20 ships are going to be allowed to come to Pakistan via the Strait of Hormuz on 2 ships per day. And that is going to be another confidence-building measure to try and bring an end to hostilities and tell the Americans that they've been somewhat successful in opening the Strait of Hormuz.
US airstrikes in Iraq have killed at least 3 fighters from the Iran-aligned Popular Mobilization Forces, or PMF. Al Jazeera's security sources have also confirmed that at least 6 Iraqi soldiers have been wounded. Police report the strikes targeted the group's regional headquarters in Kirkuk. Fires have broken out in at least 2 locations. And the PMF is a branch of the Iraqi army that includes some Iran-allied armed groups. Well, Nicholas Huck has more for us on those strikes from the capital, Baghdad.
This is a new battleground, or an expanding battleground in this war. Now, there were simultaneous attacks. Now, the latest one was in the Kurdish autonomous region in Erbil by the airport, and that's where there's the U.S. Harir base, which is probably the closest base to the Iranian border. It's about 100 kilometers away from the Iranian border. And there were 2 drones that were launched against that airbase. Of course, the U.S. air defense systems, CRAM, were activated and intercepted those drones. There was another drone strike close to the house of the president of the Kurdish autonomous region in Duhok, that's also in the Kurdish region. Now, there was a condemnation from the Prime Minister of Iraq that condemned this attack. Now, these Iraqi factions or armed groups that are closely aligned to Iran have made their intentions clear. They're targeting U.S. interest both here in Iraq, but throughout the region. Yesterday, there were attacks in neighboring Syria that were launched from the Iraqi soil. And the other attack that happened, this is an airstrike that took place in Kirkuk, which is south of Erbil, and that was the home of both the Iraqi Special Forces and the paramilitary group, the Popular Mobilization Force. Now, not all members of the Popular Mobilization Force are aligned to Iran, but there are some elements that are factions, armed groups, that follow the orders of Tehran. You know, the Iraqi government here in Baghdad are on a tightrope trying to balance this situation. They can't afford to turn their back on their biggest neighbor, Iran, nor can they afford to turn their back on the United States. Why? Well, because they have both economic security interests aligned with both countries. We talked about these Iraqi armed groups that have relationships with Iran. But there's also the economic interest. Most of the electricity, or at least a third of the electricity that powers the homes that you see behind me, come from Iran that pumps gas into the country. Now, it had cut off that gas about 2 weeks ago. Now it's pumping it again. But there are interests between Iran and Iraq in terms of the economic front, and of course the security situation.